In this lesson, we're going to be talking about return values. So what is a return value? Well, a return value is a value that a function returns to whatever script or function called this function when it completes its task. So in the previous lesson, we looked at this function sum. Again, this function takes in two numbers and produces this output. And this is how we declared it in the last lesson. We created a function called sum, and we took in two numbers, num1 and num2, and we printed out the value. So what's the issue with this? Well, we can't actually use the value that this function returned. We simply printed it to the screen. So try this. Create that same function, def sum, take in two numbers, num1 and num2, and print them. Now try and store a call to sum 3 and 3 inside of a variable called answer, and then try to print out answer. So you're going to notice one thing happens. When you go to print out the variable answer, it's going to return type none because your function didn't actually return a value. It simply printed out the value to the screen. So in other words, the variable answer is empty. So how can we actually modify this function to hold on to the value and use it later on? Well, we can simply return the value rather than printing it. So we have the same function basically, only we return a value. So we have def sum takes in two numbers, num1 and num2, and rather than printing num1 plus num2, we return num1 plus num2. So now what happens is when Python calls this function, it's going to return the value to the script, and it's going to store the value it produces inside of this variable called answer. So now when we print answer, we're going to get the answer of 6 in this case. So notice when we try to print the contents of answer, we can actually use the value. So let's take a look at this. So I'm going to create that same function I created in the last lesson, def mult. So I'm going to multiply two numbers, num1 and num2. And just to show you that this won't work, I'm going to print it. So I'm going to say num1 times num2. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a variable called answer. Answer equals mult. I'm going to pass in 2 and 3. And if we try to print answer, so I'm going to save that and I'm going to run this. So notice this, we get 6 and then we get none. So technically our function did work. It printed out the value. So what happened? So Python got to this line. It saw answer. It evaluated this function. This function evaluated, so it passed in 2 and 3 into the function. So this did run. It did print num1 times num2, 2 times 3, and print out 6. However, Python tried to store the value that this function returned inside of this variable. However, this function doesn't actually return a value, so it's going to return none. So when we try to print answer, we're going to get type none back. So let's change this line to return. Return. You can have parentheses, I don't usually add them. But now if we save that and go to try to run it, you'll notice we just get 6. We don't get that none type back because we actually stored the value inside of answer and then we printed out the variable answer.